Hi, Guy Powell here, and welcome to the next episode of the backstory on the Shroud of Turin. If you haven't already done so, please visit guypowell.com and sign up for more episodes. I am the author of the newly released book, The Only Witness, a historical fiction tracing a possible history of the Shroud of Turin over the last 2 millennia. Today, we're speaking with Otangelo Grasso, and he is a longtime researcher and speaker on the Shroud and other Christian themes. So with that, welcome, Otangelo. Good to have you.
Yeah, thank you, Guy, for having me at your channel, and it's
A-
a pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, definitely looking forward to your insights. But before we do that, let me tell you a little bit more about Otangelo. He is a Swiss-Italian machine designer, and then now he's turned into a Brazilian real estate entrepreneur, and he manages a virtual library that merges science, philosophy, archaeology, and theology. He emphasizes the importance of the Shroud of Turin, using it to illustrate and corroborate Jesus's passion, his crucifixion, and of course his resurrection, and providing empirical link between and with the gospel narratives. So, Otangelo, welcome. So, how did you get involved with the Shroud of Turin? What's your backstory?
Well, I was raised Catholic, and then I went through some depression when I was a teenager and was searching for a way out. And I was remembering um, my experience as a younger boy, 8, 9 years old, when I was praying. God was listening to my prayers. And I said, well, let me pray and see if God helps me to get out of depression. And slowly that went away. And then I met someone at work, which invited me to visit an evangelical church. And I went there, had many questions, and they were answered. And with 18, I converted, did repent from my sins, and received Christ as Lord and Savior. And then in that 85, something like that, I was got in my hands a book about Jesus living in India. That was the first time that I read about the Shroud of Turin. I was fascinated by it. And then I actually even visited Turin and the Shroud there in 87. And then when the radiocarbon C14 dating came out, basically I said, well, going with science, I don't want to believe in something which has been demonstrated to be from the Middle Ages. And from there on, I just left that aside. It didn't influence my faith. I don't think it is essential to believe that the Shroud is authentic in order to believe in the Gospels and in Christ as Lord and Savior. And I think about in 2014 or so, I got knowledge about more recent scientific investigations on the Shroud, new testing methods about the age, and that catched my attention. And I started to read about this and investigate it again. And then I think it was in 2022 or so, I was seeing many atheist YouTubers claiming that Jesus was just an invention, that he was a myth, that he didn't really exist 2000 years ago. And I said, well, let me make some deeper investigation into what actually the evidence is that points to the historical Jesus. And I did that for about 4 or 5 months. That included a deeper investigation into the Shroud, and that gave the rise to a book, Confirming Joshua. That is a book which I published on Amazon. I self-published it. It is a 2-volume book with about 900 pages, and about 200 pages I dedicate on the Shroud of Turin. That was my first adventure in writing a book about this, actually. And in November last year, my mom passed away. I went to Italy and I visited the Athenaeum Apostolorum in Rome. I met there Manuela Marinelli and Father Joseph Spence and Father Dalton. and I made an interview there. And what catched my attention was that the exposition there at the Athenaeum, they were using panels which had already about 20 years of age. So I thought, well, the information seems a little bit outdated. And since I am a machine designer, I always liked to do graphics design and so forth. When I came back to Brazil, I thought, well, why not doing something more actualized and including the recent research on the Shroud in 2011 with Paolo Di Lazzaro, which wasn't yet established in 2005. And yeah, so I did that. I made a new exposition basically with about 20 panels, and that gave rise to a new book, which I published about 2 weeks ago or so, based on these infographics and panels.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, yeah, it's interesting. There's so much research going on nowadays with the Shroud of Turin that it's hard to keep up to date. And I could imagine, that that's happening everywhere. And it's kind of interesting that it was happening in Rome, where you were with, where you, had that experience. And because I've been to some churches here in the U.S. as well, and they do get out of date, and it's kind of fascinating. Now, you also have done some interesting things with AI technology to visualize Jesus Christ and what his possible real life appearance might be. Tell us about that.
Yes, I started that in 2022 when I started to write the book. There is actually one rendering of Jesus on the Shroud of Turin, which is colored, but it was not very clear. And I got hand to a sharpening tool on the internet, and I said, well, let me try this out. So I did, and I was astonished with the result. And I said, well, it seems that we can go somewhere with this, and let me see if I can improve that image. And I've done that in about a year and 3 months or so. And I would say that it was a difficult journey. And I think that I have got a rendering which is today very close to how Jesus probably appeared in real life 2000 years ago. Of course, this is something which is really amazing. If we look the entire evolution of the unraveling of what the Shroud has given us, which starts basically with the photonegative in 1898 with Secondopia, and then with the discovery of the 3D information in the 70s. And I would say that today with the modern AI tools and internet tools that we have at hand, having been able actually to come so close to get how Jesus really probably appeared 2000 years ago is quite a remarkable development, I would say.
Yeah, it sure is. And there's a handful of different kind of 3D modern AI based renderings, and it really is surprising how similar they are. And of course they should be if they're using the same data. I think though what's interesting is I've been studying some of the old images that were done by artisans, 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago. And it's also very interesting to see how well they have done, and now in the modern times to be able to do it with AI and even get that to the next level. So kind of interesting. So that took you over a year to accomplish, to come up with an AI based version of what the real Jesus may have looked like.
Well, I improved the results over time, and yeah, I think there are things that really leave some margin open, like Jesus on the Shroud had closed eyes, so we don't know actually how his eyes looked like. but I have on Facebook a group on the Shroud of Turin, and several people there, they reported to have had visions of Jesus. They saw Jesus. And since we don't know what his eye colors were and also his beard and hair colors, so I said, well, we have free artistic freedom here to do so. I was using normally black as color because the majority of Jewish people, they have black colors and dark eyes. And then I met someone in this group which said, well, I had a vision of Jesus, and he had hazel orange eyes and brown hair. And I said, well, let me figure that out, how that looks like. And I think it did fit amazingly well. So I incorporate that in my last image.
Oh, interesting, fascinating. So how were you able to separate out the injuries that he had to his face and his nose from what would have been the uninjured face of Jesus? How did you work through that?
Well, I would say that is some kind of more intuitive work. That's precisely the margin that we have. We don't know how he looked without the injuries, but of course you can remove the injury at his cheek and the other injuries, and then you can get some quite accurate results, I would say.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, you've done some work comparing and examining the Shroud of Turin as well as the Sudarium of Oviedo. Tell us what the Sudarium is, and then tell us what you've learned there about how those two, how these two items are related.
Yeah, I think the Sudarium of Oviedo is a very fascinating artifact. It is held in Oviedo in Spain. It has a very, very interesting story. It is known historically and confirmed at least since the 6th century. And the scientific investigations, they have resulted that it covered the same man. So the blood type is AB. It has also pollens which are from the area of Palestine. It has myrrh and aloe traces, and it matches the size of the nose. So there are several indications that the Sudarium of Oviedo is the face cloth which is mentioned in the Gospel of John, when John and Peter, they went to the tomb and they entered, they saw it folded there. And I think this is in fact the Sudarium of Oviedo. And I think that besides Joe Marino's evidence that the shroud was fixed on the corner, I think that the Sudarium is the second or equally powerful evidence that the dating of the radiocarbon dating from 1988 is inaccurate, because it covered the same man, and we know the history of the face cloth back to the 6th century. So I would say that we can with certainty say that the shroud is at least as old as the Sudarium of Oviedo, at least to the 6th century. Of course, I believe it is 2,000 years old.
Yeah, I agree with that. And interestingly, as I understand it, this face cloth, the Sudarium of Oviedo, was also radiocarbon dated, and it dated to the 8th century. So
Yes.
it's even off by 200 years on the radiocarbon dating, and that could be, based on the mechanism, whatever that mechanism was, on the impact that the actual resurrection itself had on the cloth and whatever. And I don't know if we'll ever figure that out, but it'll certainly be very interesting as the sciences progress and the studies move forward. So now one thing that's also interesting, and I kind of mentioned a little bit about Christian art. How have you seen that these artifacts, these two, how have they influenced Christian art?
I would say since the 6th century, they have been a decisive relic to influence art. It started with the Byzantine art, the icons with the Pantocrator, which we have about, I think, 250 Vigno marks, which match with the face on the shroud. I have made over position of the Pantocrator and then a rendering of the degree from the Pantocrator to the man on the shroud. And it is very interesting because the positive of the shroud is like a curve. The beard is just pushed on one side, and you see that also on the Pantocrator. So it is, in my view, established that the shroud was used by the artist in the 6th century as a template to make the painting of the Pantocrator from the Mount Sinai. And from there, they is up to the Middle Ages, they just copied that image, the Pantocrator. So that had, in my understanding, a very, very important influence on art. And that goes until our days. So also in the Middle Ages, the long hair and the beard, that is, in my understanding, clearly influenced by the shroud.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I've been looking at exactly that. And even that influence, I think, goes back prior to that. You mentioned the Sinai Christ Pantocrator image. That's happens to be in the St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai, and that was I believe it was the 6th century that was that was created by the emperor as a gift to the monastery. But I've also found some images prior to that that are influenced by just those markings that you're talking about, the beard having a notch in it, and other things that you know that
Yes,
comes from the
yes.
face. So yeah, very interesting. Um, so I guess the question on everyone's mind, and I don't know if we'll ever figure it out, but is what are some of the theories on how the Shroud's image was formed, and whether those are kind of natural or supernatural or even maybe even artistic explanations. What kind of theories do you see out there for that?
Well, we know for sure that it is not a painting. It is not something made by some kind of chemicals. We know that the image is very superficial. It is based on oxidation and dehydration, and it is 0.2 micrometers thick. So it is just on the upper level of the linen cloth. So we know that it codes 3D information. So this is very strong evidence that no artist in the Middle Ages would have ever have had the technology. Even today, we don't have the technology to make that image, which is, in my understanding, very, very powerful evidence that it was supernaturally made at the resurrection. Now, how Jesus imprinted it actually, this is something which there are different hypotheses. One is by Bob Rucker, another is by Paolo Di Lazzaro. Giulio Fanti has recently brought up, I think, a very, very interesting hypothesis with the Holy Fire in Jerusalem, which I think is very fascinating and worth to be investigated. But I think basically what we do know is that Jesus at the transfiguration on the mountain, he became shining light. So I think there was some kind of VUV light or so involved at the moment when he imprinted that image on the shroud.
Yeah, yeah. And all of those theories are, I think they're getting closer to at least understanding how they could have either imprinted the image on the shroud, or with Bob Rucker, his in terms of how it may have modified the apparent age of the shroud so that the radiocarbon dating would give you this the date of 1260 to 1390, as opposed to what the more probable date is, which is obviously from the first century. And it'll be interesting. I think over the next decade, we'll have a lot more interesting theories, and possibly even hopefully even some closer proof as to narrowing down what that imprinting methodology was. And I'm definitely very interested in the Holy Fire. I think what Giulio Fanti is doing there is groundbreaking, and it'll really be interesting to see what comes out of that. And he has a new book out, by the way, and I'm sure you've seen it, his
Yes.
book on the Holy Fire.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, exactly. So now one of the other things we kind of wanted to talk about was uh, is, how do you promote the shroud's authenticity and certainly its veneration? And some people might consider that as idolatry. Certainly the Jews, I think it was the second commandment, thou shalt not make, images. And I can't remember the exact wording now, but how do you see that in terms of, this being a potential image of Christ and it being venerated versus then, of course, the commandments, the Jewish commandments, and then also lastly of idol worship? How do you see all of that coming together?
Yes, I've been many times in the recent months been accused to be an idolater, and that I should not make an image as I've done. And people say, well, Jesus, he left the image, but that doesn't mean that we have the right to make another image based on that image. And my response to that is, first of all, the command in the Old Testament against idolatry, it is a doublet. That means it starts first, you shall not make an image what is in heaven, on earth, or under the earth, and then to idolatrize it or to worship it. So that was actually something that has to be understood together. If you do something like that with the pretension then to worship that artifact which is man-made, this is what God forbids. Now, if it would be so that we shouldn't make any image whatsoever, first of all, that is not in the New Testament. Nowhere in the New Testament does it say we shouldn't make any image of Christ. And secondly, then we should forbid all kind of artwork. We should forbid movies about Jesus, of course. And someone that on Facebook accused me, I asked that person, well, in the same sense as you are criticizing me, are you doing it as well in regards of a painting of Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci? Or don't you watch a Jesus movie because you think it is some kind of idolatrous work? I think these criticisms are unfounded. And of course, I use the shroud principally as an apologetics tool. I personally don't need it to believe that Christ is who he said to be, but there are people, and I've met several of them, which said, well, I was an atheist, and I had started to investigate the shroud, and I came to become a theist and a believer and a Christian because of the evidence on the shroud. So this confirms to me that the shroud is, in fact, a good apologetics tool. And this is my my goal and why I'm involved in propagating it. And I think as well, in regards of so many that precisely are unsure how confident that they can be in regards of the gospel narratives in the Bible. And I say that the shroud is the empirical link to the narratives in the Gospels. We have empirical proof of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. And that, of course, solidifies the faith of those which maybe have some kind of doubts in special with all that bombardment of the atheist camp claiming that Jesus isn't a historical figure.
Yeah, and I think I like your point that you have to separate the veneration of Jesus as opposed to the veneration of the image of Jesus. And I think and I think your use of the shroud as an apologetic, not something that I'm going to worship the shroud, kind of like I'm not going to worship some idol or something like that. I'm worshiping Jesus, and I just happen to have an image of him. And so it's not like I'm worshiping an idol. I'm using that as a way to, as an apologetic for the Christian faith.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I pray to the risen Lord. I know that he is in heaven, so I pray to him in spirit. I don't pray to the shroud. And I think it is very interesting what Kenneth Stevenson said, which is a long time investigator and propagator of the shroud. As he said, in 10 years or more that I give speeches on the shroud, I never met someone who said to idolatrize the shroud. So
Yeah, exactly. And I guess the other interesting thing, though, about the shroud is that it's also a way for, man, as opposed to God, but man to kind of get a better understanding 2,000 years later of what Jesus looked like in terms of what you've done already, but also it's such a good reflection of the Gospels and the passion that Jesus suffered for us, while he was scourged, and while he then was forced to carry his own cross to Calvary, and then while he suffered and suffered greatly on the cross, and he did that all for us. So that right there, to me, is the whole message of the Gospels, and then what the shroud does in terms of it really reflecting exactly what happened there.
yes, I took maybe about 2 months or so to make my infographic panels. And there were really some moments when I was really reflective. Like, for example, we can see on the shroud that they nailed 2 nails into his feet, and one was through his heel. And I mean, just think about what suffering that must have been. And just recently, it was very interesting. I have some Pakistani churches which asked me to give some sermons on a weekly basis, and one was I was investigating the most powerful sermons of Charles Spurgeon, and one was about Genesis 3:15, which is kind of a foretelling of the gospel, and there it says that the serpent would hurt his heel, right? And that remembered me precisely what I saw on the shroud, that the one nail went straight through his heel. So that is, I would say, even a literal prophecy right at the beginning in Genesis. Very interesting.
Yeah, that is very interesting. And I like, when you talk about that, it's fascinating to me the things that you see in the Old Testament, and then how many of those are then reflected in the New Testament, and then certainly reflected and can be seen then, on the shroud, like the heel right there. And then of course, you have Isaiah 53 and the things that he talked about. It really is amazing how the Old Testament and the New Testament come together, and then the shroud is then that reflection of both of those writings there.
Yes, and also you don't see in the Gospels that they pluck his beard, and you can see that on the shroud. And
Right.
this is an Old Testament fulfilled, and you can see it right there.
Yeah, and it's definitely there. You can see a little U shape just pulled right out of his beard there.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. So I do have to ask you another question, and that is, so you were in Switzerland, and then you moved to Brazil. How do you see potentially the differences between, I guess, even Christianity itself, and then maybe even the perception of the shroud between, where you grew up and then where you are today? Is there any main difference or anything like that?
I wouldn't say necessarily difference, but what I see is that there is still a lot of skepticism, in special from the evangelical Protestant camp towards the shroud. And yeah, I see that. Precisely one of the reasons you mentioned is the criticism that it could be an artifact for idolatry. So I think there have a lot of barriers still to be um, brought down. Also, many people still skeptic that if it is indeed the burial cloth of Jesus. Many people are still not educated about the science that testifies that it is authentic. Many still believe that the radiocarbon dating is the death knell for the shroud. So a lot of misinformation still out there. And I think those which study the shroud, the scholars, have a lot to do to educate people about what we actually do know today.
Yeah, I think you're right. The education piece of overcoming that huge obstacle of the radiocarbon dating and what that did. I remember when I first read about in the late 70s about STIRP and then the original investigations that were done, and I was very fascinated with that. And then when the radiocarbon dating came out, then I kind of put everything to the side. And then nowadays, even, I guess it's been 20 years now, that radiocarbon dating has been totally, destroyed as a valid proof of the age of the shroud. It had
Yeah.
so many errors and so many flaws in the methodology and the results and the analysis of the results and things like that. And it's only now, I think, in the last few years that it seems like there's the activity around understanding the shroud has just exploded, and there's so many different things going on. It's really just amazing. I don't know about you, but I can't keep up with everything that's going on.
Yes, that's true. And I think it's not only the scientific confirmation, but also what has been unraveled in regards of the pre-13th century history. We have a lot of information. So I think today someone saying, well, we don't have any knowledge about what happened prior that date. That's simply not true. I mean, I am dedicating about 200 pages just on the pre-14th century history of the shroud, and there is so much information there. Also, the coins,
Mm,
from the Byzantine era and from many countries in Europe, where you see the beard, the bifurcation of the beard in many coins, and also in England and many other places. So the evidence that the shroud is not from the Middle Ages is overwhelming from various sides.
yeah, yeah. And there's not only the coins with the bifurcated beard and then the piece ripped out of it, but I've been studying as well, and I'm sure you've seen it, where you have the outline of the stomach, the outline of the abdomen being highly accented, which reflects one of the water stains that's on the shroud on the front side of the shroud. And there are so many paintings and mosaics and what have you that depict that. And those go back, as far as I found so far, as back to the 11th and the 10th centuries. And so that's another proof that kind of says, yep, the shroud had to have existed in the 10th and 11th centuries. To your point about the coins, that gets us back to the 7th century. And then you have the Sudarium of Oviedo, the face cloth, and that then is corroborates very well with the face on the shroud, and that takes us back to the 6th and the 5th centuries. So it's there is very, very good proof through a number of different dimensions.
Yeah, what is intriguing, you mentioned that before, that we have indeed even images from the Roman Empire prior to the 6th century. One is from Ostia in Rome, and there you see very clearly the bifurcated beard. And I think that prior to that, there were regions in the Roman Empire where Christianity had already spread, where people didn't have the knowledge of the shroud, and they thought that he was without beard and with short hair. And there are other artifacts which suggest that other people actually had access to the shroud and knew that he had long hair and a beard.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's kind of it's interesting because there's this thing called the discipline of the secret, which kind of faded away. It was certainly there to make sure that the shroud stayed safe and that the Jews and the Roman Empire itself weren't going to try and capture it and destroy it. So it was kept relatively secret up until about the 5th, 6th centuries. And then it's only about then that you start to see some images and depictions and mosaics of Jesus that reflect the face in the shroud, and then certainly reflect the beard, and then the blood stain on his forehead, and a handful of other markings. So it's a fascinating era, and all of that absolutely points to its authenticity, at least going back to the 5th century, and then most likely then all the way back to the 1st century.
Absolutely, absolutely. You see Solidus coins which have the cheek outstanding, and there are other marks like below the neck, which are clearly parallel to the marks on the shroud, and several other things which, if you put all this kind of information together and you put it on the table and weight it, then you have to say, well, the evidence is overwhelming that the shroud is much older than from the Middle Ages.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, Otangelo, we've been going actually quite a while, and almost a little bit over from what we would normally do. So I really appreciate it. It's always fascinating to talk to somebody about the latest and greatest findings of about the shroud and what different folks have done. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yes, it was fun to talk to you, Guy. Some great. I appreciate, and it's an honor to be at your channel. And
Absolutely.
I want also to say that I'm starting an initiative to try to make the shroud well known in parts of the world where I have seen that most Christians and people in general have no information whatsoever about its existence, like in Africa, in Asia, in Pakistan, in India, and Kenya, and so forth. And I think that there is still a lot of work ahead in order that many still can know about it and be amazed about what it
Yeah,
conveys to us.
absolutely. So now you have a couple of books out. Where can people find them, and what are their titles?
Well, just put my name on Amazon. I've published them there, self-published, and there you will find two books, which are one is Joshua, Confirming Joshua, and the second, just search, you will find several titles, not only about the shroud, and you will find them there. The second is From
Fantastic.
Forensics to Faith, the Shroud of Turin's History and Authenticity Under Scrutiny.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you for that. So look for Otangelo Grasso on Amazon, and you'll find then a couple of the books that he's discussed today, that we've discussed today. And then otherwise, for my audience, please stay tuned for many other videos in this series on the backstory of the Shroud of Turin. And if you'd like to, please visit guypowell.com and sign up for more episodes. And I believe, Otangelo, you also have a Facebook page. What's your Facebook page?
Yeah, just search on Facebook the Shroud of Turin. That's the name of the group. It is one of the largest. I have almost 14,000 members, and I share frequently information there and others too. So feel free to
Fantastic.
join. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So facebook.com, go to facebook.com and search on Shroud of Turin. Otangelo, thank you so much again, and look forward to potentially speaking again. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Guy. Thanks for the audience, and till next time.
Absolutely.